Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to talk about the new, inverted commas, album from Neil Young, which was released last Friday, the same day as the new Dylan album, and rather less hype attached to this than the Bob album. In fact, I only found out about it, I think, on Saturday or Sunday. So I checked it out, and it's a joy. I presume hardcore fans are familiar with the tracks through bootlegs and stuff, but I haven't got all of Neil's albums, and I certainly haven't got any of his bootlegs, so I was not familiar with most of these tracks. Some of them had seen a release on later albums, maybe three or four of or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the songs had seen a release, some of them re-recorded, but most of them, for me, brand new. So a bit of history. He'd put out On the Beach in 1974, and he was wondering which album to follow it up with, and he had two in the can. One was this album, Homegrown, and which was recorded, I think, June 74 to January 75, I was reading. And he also had an unreleased album at the time recorded in 73, which was this, Tonight's the Night. And apparently he said he listened to both at a playback session and decided that Tonight's the Night had more power in the performances, and he found Homegrown a bit too personal. He said it was so personal it scared me. Well, I think it's a hallmark of Neil Young's work throughout his career, really, that it's always been intensely personal, and no more so than that period from 73 to 75, say, where it was quite soul-bearing. I mean, On the Beach is not an easy listen, superb, of course, and then Tonight's the Night covered the death of two of his friends, and again, it's not an easy listen, but it's up there in my top Neil Young albums. And this album, Homegrown, well, yes, it is personal, but it wasn't overly so, and I'm really glad it's been released now. So as I go through the tracks, I'll tell you whether it's been released before last Friday on another album. But there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 tracks on here. Runs to a standard album length, and it's about the subject matter covers the breakup with his then girlfriend. So maybe that was another reason why he didn't put it out. But it's worth mentioning that it features Emmylou Harris on backing vocals on a few tracks, who'd also obviously played with loads of people over the years, and including Bob Dylan, Desire, the same year, 75, all came out in January 76. So that was interesting, and it made me want to actually go and check out some of Emmylou's albums, which I'm going to do actually now. After this review. So yeah, it opens up with Separate Ways, and it's just a gorgeous track. I mean, none of these tracks are like, as one review said, there's no Cortez the Killer on here, or there's no My Hey Hey, but so what all of the tracks to me are well written conversational pieces, personal, melodic, and Separate Ways is quite a dark track, but it's a very good opener, and Try is probably my favourite track on the album, which is next, which contains my favourite line, I think I'd like to take a chance, but shit Mary, I can't dance, which I thought was hilarious. And that's a more upbeat track lyrically, but again, a very high standard. Mexico is quite a short number, which finds Neil on, I think it's Neil playing piano. I don't have a full musician credit of this album. I don't have it on CD yet, hasn't come to Hungary, don't have it on vinyl. I'm going to pick it up probably. It's amazing, by the way, that we had Hitchhiker came out in 2017, which was another lost album from 76, albeit with songs which were later released on a few occasions, a bit like this. But staggering to think that Neil Young had, up until 3 years ago, had almost 2 albums in the can of unreleased stuff from the mid-70s. And you know, maybe you may not agree, but I think Neil Young's peak was the 70s, and he was on fire throughout that decade. Absolutely amazing consistency. So Mexico's quite a short track, but very good. Love is a Rose did find its way onto Decade, which was a decade-long compilation of greatest hits with very nice packaging. Came out on vinyl recently, remastered. That is a lovely track. Homegrown was re-recorded with Crazy Horse for the Stars and Bars album here, but this is the original version, and I'd like to know who played all the instruments, but I don't have that information. Then we have maybe the only dismissible track, which is Florida, which isn't really a track at all. It's just Bob talking about how nice it is to be in Florida, and it's just a spoken word track. I'm not sure what it's doing on here, but anyway. Then we got Kansas, which is an excellent rocking number, and then We Don't Smoke It No More, I guess, is an ode to his girlfriend he was splitting up with. And it's a blues song, and I was interested that this is actually a better listen when Neil's doing the blues than when Bob's doing the blues on his latest album, which is, I just don't know if it's something about Neil's guitar playing or Neil's harmonica, or there's not too much vocals on here, but he makes it sound more interesting, because often blues songs can be less than interesting. But this, not so in this case. Then White Line is a lovely acoustic duet with Robbie Robertson from the band, which was re-recorded for the Ragged Glory album 1990. Then we've got a track called Vacancy, which is thoroughly decent. Little Wing maintains the standard and was released on the Hawks and Doves album in 1980. And then Star of Bethlehem was on here again, Stars and Bars, and found its way into Decade as well, but it was originally going to be on here. So I don't know what to say. I mean, this album's been on repeat. I'm playing it more than the Bob album at the moment. I'm not skipping any tracks. I'm just playing it through on virtually on repeat listen. So that's a sign of a good album. I'm not going to say it's. I think it's a bit unfair to compare it to Bob's new album, because this is a vintage 75 recording when the artist was at his absolute peak, and obviously Bob was at his peak in the 70s, I think, and the 60s. But that's not to take away from this album, because it's it's amazing that it was in the vaults, and he's seen fit to release it, which is great news for the fans. And the track listing. Sorry, I don't have the physical album to show you, but I'd give it a solid 4+ stars, 4.5 probably. Maybe not quite as good as Tonight's the Night, and not quite as good as my favourites, which is Comes a Time and Ross Never Sleeps. I think those are my 3 favourites, but this is up there with the vintage Neil Young classic 70s stuff. Thank you for watching. See you next time.